In the Gospel of John, John describes the exaltation of Jesus, and it is a paradox. Let's read from John chapter 12. The words of Jesus sounds like this: "But I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself," reading from the New International Version. And then John comments. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The one who is exalted is a reference to the servant of the Lord described in Isaiah 53, or rather 52, verse 13. And just a little later in the chapter 12, John refers back to the exaltation of the Most Holy described in the vision of Isaiah in Isaiah 6:1. And he says, Isaiah said this because he saw the glory of Jesus and spoke about him. Welcome to another tidbit from the Bible, and we are actually starting the book of Isaiah. But you see, here you have the New Testament's way of speaking about Isaiah and pointing to a major theme which will be our focus in this conversation today about Isaiah chapter 13 to 27. Chapter 13 to 27 are by all commentators regarded, rightly so, as a unit in itself. After having spoken about the future dream vision for Jerusalem and the people in Judah, and after having spoken about the tribulations they would go through in the first 12 chapters, Isaiah compiles a number of visions and prophecies about the nations at large. And these prophecies cover then chapters 13 to 27. And the major prophecy is about the king of Babylon. There are good reasons for that. Babylon was the arch enemy of the people of God. Babylon was also the religious center of Mesopotamia. For any king, this was the most prestigious title to receive from a religious point of view, the king of Babylon. All Assyrian kings, even though they had a greater military power at some stage, wanted to be kings of Babylon. So that was one of the major titles they fought their way to resume every time a new king had to take over. So Babylon is a religious enemy per se of God's people, historically, and of course also in the biblical description symbolically. So the major prophecy about the king of Babylon is given in the book of Isaiah in chapters 13 and 14, and we are going to jump straight into the main text of this funeral dirge regarding the king of Babylon. We find it in chapter 14 in Isaiah, and let me move my Bible to this point, and let's read from verse 12. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Now, let me turn to Isaiah 52:13 for just a moment, for comparison between the two main figures in the book of Isaiah, besides the prophet himself. That is the arch enemy, the king of Babylon, and the messianic servant of the Lord. In chapter 52, verse 13, the poem begins, which includes all of chapter 53, which is how we normally refer to it. But listen, verse 13, "See my servant will act wisely, he will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted." So here you have the two opposites. The king of Babylon attempts to raise himself up, and he is humiliated. He is proud, he will be humbled. While the servant of the Lord, who comes to us in all humility and service, he will be exalted. Now, the theme of exaltation, expressed with terms like being high and lifted up, dominates the book of Isaiah. It runs through the whole book. So let's just turn a few of the pages and go back to chapter 2. Chapter 2 introduces the vision of the future Jerusalem. In the last days, it says in verse 2, "The mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and nations will stream to it." But vision is one thing, reality another, and reality takes over in the description. And from verse 12 and onwards, we will see how the description of the judgment of the people goes. Let me take in verse 11 as well. "The eyes of the arrogant man will be humbled, and the pride of men brought low. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. The Lord Almighty has a day in store for all the proud and lofty, for all that is exalted, and they will be humbled. For all the cedars of Lebanon, tall and lofty," and so on. "The arrogance of man will be brought low, and the pride of men humbled. The Lord alone will be exalted on that day," as verse 17 says, and by an inclusio frames this section. Only the Lord is high. This theme is then underscored in the opening vision, calling Isaiah to become a prophet in chapter 6. "In that year of King Uzziah's death, Isaiah said, saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted." So only the Lord is exalted. And what the king of Babylon attempts is to take the place of the Lord, to make himself one with the Lord. He is not. However, the Davidic king who is to come, he is exalted. As the poem in Philippians 2 describes it, he was one with God, he became a human being, and then after his death and resurrection, he again will be high and lifted up, he will be exalted. The comparison is strong in the book. Now, remember too, that when the ancients in the Near East described the world, they saw the world in two levels. All earthly events were related to heavenly events. All temples were mirrors of heavenly institutions. Every king on earth would have a heavenly counterpart. So when the description here of the king of Babylon seems to move beyond a mere political military description, it is just in line with this worldview. It moves beyond to describe the spiritual originator of Babylon, behind the scenes, to a spiritual battle. So when the Latin translation of the term O morning star said Lucifer, that is the devil himself, that is not off the point. This is the son of the dawn. He makes himself, tries to make himself the king of the world, of the universe, to be one with God. He comes to us as an angel of light, but his attitude is that of a proud and selfish leader. So, in the overall structure of the book of Isaiah, these two chapters actually also come at parallel sections. One text describes the proud ruler who wants to become like God and who is humbled. The other text describes the humble servant who actually is one with God and who will be exalted. Students of these texts in Hebrew have found that there are actually several details, even in linguistic details, between chapter 14 and chapter 53 that link the two together as the opposite. But I want to close with another tidbit, which might deserve a closer study of the book of Revelation. Because one of the questions that we are left with is, what is this mountain? We read about the mountain in chapter 14, where the king of Babylon says, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. The mounts of assembly, in Hebrew, Ha-Moed. What is that? Now, actually, it's even said that it is in the far north, which is not evident from the translation of NIV. Remember, far north is symbolic. In Psalm 48, in the introduction, you will find that Zion is called the mountain in the far north. So the mountain here is the mountain of Zion. It may be the heavenly Zion if you think about the devil or Satan, the earthly mountain in Jerusalem, Mount Zion, if you think about the earthly the earthly king of Babylon. What is this Ha-Moed? Moed is a term that usually describes either the place where people gather to worship God, or the people who actually gather there, and then it's used about the festivals for which they gather. In particular, in some cases, about the Day of Judgment, but in plural, Moadim will be a name for the festivals in general. The mountain where they meet is the mountain in Jerusalem. It is Mount Zion. This is the mountain that the devil tries to conquer, where he wants to reign. In the book of Revelation, I believe, and some disagree with me, but I will throw it out as a tidbit. In the book of Revelation, this mountain is referred to by a Greekization, a transliteration of the Hebrew term into Harmageddon. So Ha-Moed becomes Harmageddon. There are good linguistic reasons for that. The symbolic language already in the book of Isaiah paves the way for the symbolic usage in the last book of the Bible, where the king of Babylon will try to conquer the heavenly Jerusalem, and Satan, Lucifer, the fallen angel, son of dawn, will try to take the position in heaven, in the heavenly sanctuary, on the heavenly throne, the position that belongs to Christ or to the Lamb of God alone. But the proud will be humbled, and those who are humble will be exalted. Thank you for listening to Tidbits from the book of Isaiah, and we'll move on next week with even more studies in this magnificent prophetic book. Thank you.